Hi, and welcome to AXSChat. We're delighted that this week we have with us Dr. Gregg Beratan. Um, Thank you very much for joining us, Greg, and it's really good to finally see you outside of Twitter. You've started something called a movement on Twitter. It's a hashtag movement. It's called CripTheVote, which I think is fascinating and very timely given what's going on in America right now. Especially since tomorrow's Super Tuesday, the biggest of the primaries. So please tell us a bit more about yourself and how you came to be involved in what you're doing.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. And I mean, for months now, the disability community has been bemoaning the fact that there's an absolute silence within the election about disability issues. I mean, even when they were talking about issues that mattered to us, we weren't part of the conversation. And so I think it was, after the 12th debate, and no mention of disability, we were, myself, Alice Wong, who's another wonderful person you guys should have on here, and Andrew Pulrang, again another great person in the community. We're talking what can we do, because there's an absolute silence here, and I think Alice suggested the hashtag, and when we started talking about things we could do with it, and that led to our first two Twitter chats, which happened right before the February 11th and February 13th debates.
Okay.
And they were wonderful. We were amazed at the turnout. We had such an incredible amount of support from the community. People came out that normally, you see tweeting once a day or something, and came out and participated in the chat, and were so eager to voice their concerns and what mattered to them in this campaign. And it was wonderful to see. We've also managed to through this connect with other groups that have their own efforts going on, like AAPD,
Okay.
and the Rev Up campaign. Yod Disabled and Proud has an effort under Vote Disability. And so, we've managed to connect and draw these networks together and amplify the concerns people already have.
Okay. So you talked about these various different groups. Have you also managed to get some participation from, if not the candidates themselves, their supporters and support networks? Because obviously there are massive machines behind all of these political candidates.
We've certainly had supporters from various candidates come on, and from the whole spectrum of of politics, from the right to the left, and I think one thing that's become clear is that even if someone, even though people have maybe partisan and chosen a candidate, I mean, CripTheVote is a nonpartisan effort, but even if someone has chosen a candidate and they're happy with them and they're not planning on changing, many of them aren't satisfied with the candidates' positions on disability issues. You look at the websites, the ones that have actually addressed disability issues are very superficial. I mean, you might have a statement about CRPD, a statement about jobs. I think one has an autism plan, but that's more directed at parents. So people have really latched onto the fact that we need to hear more, and I think that's been really encouraging.
So Deborah, did I see that you had a question?
Yes, I know. I've been tracking what your group has been doing, Greg, and we have actually invited Alice Wong to be on, but logistically, she said it was going to be very difficult being in California,
Yeah.
and so I asked Alice long time ago because she's such a brilliant contributor to these conversations. And as a matter of fact, somebody on my team, Rosemary Musashio, born with cerebral palsy, just did an article, blog an article about Alice. So we're fascinated with the contributions that Alice is making.
She's a powerhouse.
She is a powerhouse and a very, very important voice. I know that Respectability is doing a lot of work with this and actually sending, really talking to all of these different camps and making it bipartisan, which is very important. To me, it's not about Republicans versus Democrats. It's about, and I'm one of those many undecided voters. I have an idea. Yeah, I have an idea of who I'm going to vote for, and I am voting tomorrow in Super Tuesday. But I am still one of the ones that a candidate could swing my vote if they could give me, help me feel confident that they were really going to meaningfully include people with disabilities in the employment conversations, the transportation, the housing, all of the issues that we see. And as we talked about before we started, we know this is a global conversation. This is not just about U.S. politics, but the U.S. politics get a lot of attention globally, and it's very important.
If the U.S. does something, if the U.S. starts to take action, there's evidence that other countries follow suit.
Yeah.
I mean, not to say everyone should copy us, because people's problems are contextual. I've lived around the world and I've seen that the same solutions that work in one place don't necessarily work in the other.
Right.
But it is a matter of making a statement. This is what we need to do, and I agree. I think I could be swayed to different candidates if they started talking about disability issues. And we face, in the U.S. I mean, I can give you the numbers. The disability unemployment rate is 10.8%, and the non-disabled rate is 5.1%. That's unacceptable. I mean, there's no reason it needs to be twice the unemployment rate.
Right, and then you get into the severe disabilities, and the numbers are staggering. And certainly,
I personally, I don't find value in the functioning labels, but whether or not it's severe or mild. But I've seen people work with all sorts of disabilities. People can work, and people can find useful employment that that makes them happy, gives them a living, helps them support themselves. But we have structures built into our economy, into business, that actually impede this, that prevent it. And until people step up and force them to change, and I'm not big on forcing people to do anything, but at this point, the government has to step up and make enforce ADA in places and expand it in others.
Yeah, it's a very multidimensional topic, that's for sure.
Mm.
And the reason why I bring up the severe, which is an interesting word to use anyway, is because we're still very confused by these topics globally. Yeah. And the numbers, you start digging into the numbers, and they're very troubling. So what I have said when I've been tweeting and posting about these presidential elections is I'm always using the hashtag undecided. Mm-hmm. And I talk about, for me, what is important as one voter, what is important to me that comes from a candidate. And of course what I care about, for a lot of different reasons, is disability, inclusion, and empowerment. I care about, for example, the student loan mess. I care about political reform. There's some hot buttons for me as a voter. And a lot of my friends and family and colleagues have some of those same issues. But I remember I put out a post about voting, we won't go into that, but me voting as a woman, do I have an obligation to only vote gender? And I believe that I'm going to vote for the candidate that, cares about the issues and that I'm a candidate, hopefully, that's going to further the cause for the issues I care about. And so I put out there undecided, and one of the campaigns came back and said, "Oh, you're undecided. Vote for my candidate." Now, I'll tell you, Marco Rubio's camp came back and said, "Vote for Marco Rubio." And so I shot back. I believe in being professional on social media. I shot back and said, "Tell me what Marco Rubio is going to do for the issues I care about. Tell me the camp. Tell me about disability inclusion." I named 4, got no response. So, and it might be that I'm not saying that Marco Rubio's camp doesn't care about it, but maybe I was just talking to one of his supporters and not the camp. So, but I vote based on the issues. I don't vote party lines. I don't vote based on if a candidate is attractive or not attractive. I vote based on who I think is going to do the best job with the things that I care about as an American citizen. But it is, as we've said, it is, the circus that we're having right now with the presidential candidates, it's, I think, indicative of what's happening in the world. And so, and I loved the hashtag CripTheVote. It's, in some ways, a little controversial, that hashtag. And so I can't help but be very intrigued by that. But
yeah, I mean, we've seen it as a way of reclaiming the language,
right,
and owning it, and forcing people to engage with disability in ways they may not be comfortable with.
I agree, and I like it.
Yeah.
I also think it really speaks to the millennials, which I think is very, very important, that the millennials have a very empowered way, and I think reclaiming the language is very important.
I mean, the wonderful thing in looking at the response we've gotten is that we've had such an amazing response from all ends of the political spectrum, age demographics, across disabilities. There have been people that have expressed difficulty with the hashtag and participating in it, and we respect that. We don't, we don't tell them they have to come along, obviously. There are plenty of other options out there with some of the other efforts I mentioned. But generally the response has been fantastic, and the range of people has been overwhelming.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And I know we don't want to make this just about the U.S. vote. I know we're talking about voting and voting rights, and there are a lot of problems with voting, accessible voting. I know that as a parent of a daughter with Down syndrome in Virginia, we vote in Virginia, and I go in to the voting booth with her. As a family, we talk about the issues a lot. We watch all of the debates. We're really sort of political nerds at our house. And she actually votes differently from my husband and I often. And right now, and I got to decide because I'm going in the voting polls tomorrow, but she is right now, she's supporting a candidate differently, that's different from the candidate that I'm thinking about voting for, my husband. But she has grounded, even as a young woman with intellectual disabilities, she has a grounded reason why she's voting this way.
And this is the thing we need to respect. I mean, I think we get so many messages in our society telling us to dismiss the thoughts and opinions of developmentally disabled adults, and why? What may I mean? Donald Trump just thanked the uneducated voters, so why dismiss any other voters? I think part of giving people acceptance, disability acceptance is about, accepting everyone for who they are and what they think and what they believe. And, why do we dismiss this one group of people? They have their own opinions. I have a twin sister with Down syndrome as well, and so, she votes, and she, has her own criteria for who she's going to vote for, and, she announces it to us the day before she's going to vote, and, doesn't want our advice, and we don't tend to give it to her.
Well, And that's a really good point, Greg. I'm going to make this, and I'm going to turn it back over to Neil and let Antonio have a chance too. But one thing that I saw happen on the last elections, and I'm sure you watched this as well too, Greg, was that some people actually came out and started saying that family members like myself that has and a person that can vote that has Down syndrome, that we're taking advantage of the system because really I have 2 votes because I influence her. Now, of course, we influence each other all the time. I try to influence my husband. I try to influence my friends. Sometimes it works. But I thought there was a very dangerous precedent that I saw doing that, in that, well, you're influencing your daughter. Well, once again, I'm always trying to influence my children, my peers, my friends, and as they are trying to influence me as well. So there was a danger the last election. Do you remember that? That was very scary conversations.
I do. I think you've seen it followed up with a lot of these voter ID laws that try and limit the disability vote.
Yeah.
Limit the vote of people of color. And so you've seen, you know, all these attempts to limit the vote. But, you know, the fact is, parents have influence over their kids, you know, disabled or not. And so, you know, it's no different than any non-disabled kid who talks to their parents about the election. But, you know, I think it's wrong to imply that you're going to vote for your daughter. And that's what they tended to imply.
Right, right. I thought it was dangerous precedent.
Yeah. And I guarantee you'll see it again.
I know,
sadly.
I know.
I don't think we have so much in the way of voter suppression. It's entirely possible to get accessible voting in the UK. We don't also have the same kind of hanging Chad issues that you have, because we don't use automated voting machines for a start in the UK. That said, we're out of the electoral cycle at the moment, but it's going to be really interesting because there is some real heavy politics going on at the moment, because we've got a big political debate. It's not party political, about whether or not we should stay within Europe, and that in itself will have profound implications for the rights of people with disabilities, because the European Union is in the process of putting together fairly strong pan-European, pan-disability legislation. If the UK is to exit from the EU, we will not benefit from that legislation. And so I don't think anyone yet is thinking about that in terms of the referendum that's coming in a few months, and I think it's probably something that we probably need to CripTheVote too. I know Antonio's got a question, so I'll let him have his say.
Yeah, I'll be moving away a little bit from the elections, even if I consider that, you know, most candidates, they don't really have an inclusive language, so they speak for the media, and that's it.
Yes.
Mark, over the last couple of years, we have been able to see a good number of companies releasing what they call diversity reports. You know, it seems to be a kind of fashion. You know, every season, everybody releases diversity reporting. But when we go deep into that reporting, it's very limited in the approach and in the content of what they call diversity. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that, and if you have done any studies that can help us here, or if you have the chance to talk with some companies who are somehow trying to shift away from this standard way of modeling diversity.
I mean, my research is mostly on education, but when I was working in India, we did training for a lot of companies on inclusive hiring and inclusive employment, and a lot of them, yes, had very limited understandings of what diversity meant. I mean, just in relation to disability, they had, you know, they hadn't really questioned what their understandings of disability were, and so, you know, they didn't see the ways in which they limited the access they were giving to employees. You you'd go to a place and you'd see there's only one accessible bathroom in the building, and it's on the ground floor. So I'm sure that put off a lot of employees. But even the ones that were willing to accept the jobs didn't necessarily get it because they presumed that people couldn't do them. I had friends that showed up for interviews not having disclosed their disability, and as soon as their wheelchair or canes were seen, someone quietly came out and said, "I'm sorry, the interview's been canceled and will be rescheduled," and they never heard from them again. And these were multinational corporations. These weren't, just Indian companies. I think until they actively interrogate, their own understandings of disability and what accessibility takes and what, inclusive employment means, I don't know that we're going to see that kind of progress.
So I think that we're probably getting a fair amount of window dressing in some of these reports.
Mm.
I think as we have more people involved inside the large companies that have a disability, that are part of their diversity programs, that things will change. So it was important for us when we were setting up our diversity initiatives within Atos that it wasn't just sex and race that were the things that we were counting as diversity. We actually took 4 key dimensions, and so we had culture, and we also had disability as a key dimension of our diversity policy. And it's expanding. So we're creating various different employee networks around all of these, and then expanding to LGBTQIA and to look at age and reverse mentoring and all of these kind of things, because diversity is true diversity, not just gender reporting, not just your racial equality statistics. We want to promote something that is much more inclusive in a big way, and we believe that kind of inclusion will drive innovation, make us more effective, make us less.
Can I ask you?
Yes.
Do you think the Equalities Act has affected that positively or negatively? Because my impression when it was passed was that you're sort of erasing the markers of difference, and it was going to actually hurt efforts like diversity efforts in corporations.
I think that the Equality Act has been a bit of a disaster, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
In theory, it's a great idea, but in practice, it's so woolly. It's almost unenforceable. There are some great things about it that say you must be proactive, which is a good thing, and they define what discrimination is, but there's no clear mandate as to what accessibility means. There's no clear definition of reasonable. We've taken away any as a result, you used to have all of these different bodies that were responsible for racial equality, for disability equality, and you've ended up, and the EHRC is operating on vastly reduced funding. So if you're asking me not just about the Equality Act, but whether or not in Britain today we are a more equal society than we were 10 years ago, or in 20, or even 6 years ago in 2010 when the Equality Act was enacted, I would say no. And I would say
it can't have helped that the Tories have declared war on disabled people.
Yeah. So but it's beyond that, because a lot of the things that the Tories, and indeed some of the companies like my own that have done work for the government, actually came in under policies that were cooked up by civil servants under the Labour administration beforehand. One needs to be a bit careful. I think that the the language that is being used by our current government is absolutely quite punitive towards people with disabilities, but some of the policies were already being formulated by previous governments. So I think that we've moved from a position where we were a country that I believe was leading in terms of some of the policies that we had and some of the structures that we built to support people, and we've watched that be rapidly dismantled. And that, for me, is a great concern. The only thing that I can take out of it, any kind of positive, is that actually a lot of businesses have recognized the business case for inclusion and are implementing stuff not because they legally have to, but because they recognize that it's to their benefit to do so.
This is good.
And I think it's fair to say that's quite a good, interesting movement from the civil society and associations and organizations that are also driving the agenda and rights of people with disabilities. That's, at least that's what I see externally from being in Ireland. That's what I see in UK, especially compared with other countries that I'm more close to, like Ireland or Portugal, where that pressure or those organizations don't work in the exact same way. They don't organize themselves. They don't work as coalitions to try to identify best practices and to involve business in the activities that they are currently doing.
This is good. Now, I mean, Ireland's an interesting place. There's a lot going on there, both privately and politically. I mean, the disability movement there is incredibly active, and you're seeing a lot of pressure on the government. You're seeing, you know, they're one of the people that have sort of tried to CripTheVote there right now, and you're seeing a lot of efforts underway. I think there's some wonderful things going on in Scotland as well. You know, with to make inroads, and I think they have the leeway because of the well, one of the few benefits of devolution, I guess. But
I think that was a really interesting thing. I used to work for a company that worked on the disabled student allowance, and what we used to see was that the provision was very different in Scotland. And they were ahead in terms of where they were at, in terms of their thinking. So I think organisations like the Bright Centre, are you familiar with the Bright Centre?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they've been dismantled now.
Yes.
But people like Alison Cox at the Bright Centre did an amazing job of putting together the sort of first sort of accessibility professional qualifications and stuff like that. So, you know, we're talking about, you know, I'm a member of the IAAP, and we're looking at professionalising the industry now. But Scotland was doing this in the education sphere 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, it was, you know, really ahead of its time.
No, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I think there have been some wonderful things that have, you know, I was opposed to devolution on a lot of grounds, but there have been some wonderful things that have come out of it. That it's allowed some, you know, the leeway it has allowed has been wonderful. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a shame it's not extended throughout the UK. When I was there, I was heavily involved in student union politics when I lived in Britain, and you know, we'd often lament that we didn't have the same the same status in London that they did in Edinburgh or Glasgow.
So obviously, it's been great that you spent some time in our 51st state.
Did my PhD there.
Okay, so where did you do your PhD?
The Institute of Education. It's, I guess, part of UCL now.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, wonderful place. I couldn't have asked for a better place. It was just nice to be in a place with, you know, critical mass of folk, you know, focused on education, disability. I got to work with people like Len Barton and Felicity Armstrong there, and it was just wonderful.
Yeah. So I'm actually working on a project with some students from UCL at the moment, trying to put together an app to help with dyscalculia. So,
excellent.
so
I look forward to it as someone with dyscalculia. So.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful word. It's even worse than dyslexia for.
Oh yeah, no, I never know how to pronounce it, and you never know whether someone's about to correct me. But
but it's such a when we talk about hidden disabilities, dyscalculia is just the most hidden of these kind of hidden disabilities, because people really are afraid to talk about maths anxiety and afraid. Because people equate intelligence with numeracy, even more so than with literacy. If you can't read, people look at you in a certain way. But if you can't count, that's considered to be, or if you have no concept of numbers, that's considered to be significantly worse. And so there's just hidden swathes of the population that never talk about it. It's really difficult to get people to come and talk about dyscalculia because no one wants to. No one wants to be flagging themselves up. It's really tricky to try and find people to go and test my test my.
I mean, for me, it's the one I've hidden from the most. I mean, I probably spent 15 years hiding from a disabled identity altogether. From the point I got my diagnosis to, I guess I was probably about 30. And then the last 15 years, I've sort of embraced it. But I've probably run from dyscalculia more than any of them, just because it creates the most discomfort for me. I mean, writing, as someone with dysgraphia, writing's painful, but I need to do it for work, and I need to do it, just to express myself sometimes. So I've had to engage that. But dyscalculia, no, I've shied away from numbers. To this day, I'll probably still, run when I see large quantities of numbers, even though I have to deal with quantitative data, and so.
Wow. And I know what you mean about writing being painful, because I'm also someone that when we have to write, it's the white knuckle ride. I just remember, I hardly write these days. It's quite rare, because I'm on a computer most of the time, and that's less.
Even on a computer, dysgraphia affects me. I mean, the way I describe it to people, I get through 3 words in a sentence, and I have to reconstruct the rest of the sentence. And so, it's wonderful in one respect, in that my sentences come out almost fully edited, but on the other side, it takes about 3 times as long, and it's painful. Yeah, it's.
Oh, yeah. So I have dyslexia, and again, I will be formulating stuff, and it takes me a while. Doesn't mean that I don't like writing. I like the end process. I like the end result.
Exactly. Well, Bell Hooks wrote about it once. She called it remembered rapture. And she talked about it as if, this feeling when you're done and you have that complete thought in your head, or, on the page. It's a wonderful feeling. But getting there is not quite as nice.
Antonio, did you have another question?
Yes, I do. We're already doing the AXSChat. We are on our, we are on our, basically, I can say this, on our 3rd year. But we have the chance to talk with people from different parts of the world, working in many different projects, each of them working on different advocacy programs. So, where do you see advocacy today, and how effective you think that advocacy is being done? Because we see a lot of work being done by international organizations, but before we were able to observe in terms of data analytics from that we relate from the web, we don't see the yet the level of engagement that is required. Can you give us a little bit of your vision about the status of where we are now at this stage?
Well, I mean, I think, one of the things holding us back are some of these big organizations. You've got groups like Autism Speaks. I mean, I'm heavily involved in the boycott for Autism Speaks, a boycott of Autism Speaks, and this is, if they were talking about any other group besides disabled people, you'd call them a hate group, and so I think a lot of these organizations hold us back. But one of the things that gives me hope is that you see these wonderful self-advocacy efforts, whether it's the autistic community, ASAN, or the Autism Women's Network, or groups like Speaking for Ourselves, PIT projects that operate around the U.S. In India, we had a strong group of self-advocates. Part of what I did was, I ran two parts of an organization there, the Disability Rights Wing and the Training Wing. Our training, at first I thought they were going to be completely separate and I was going to have to balance my time, and I did, but the training wing, one of the biggest helps to our training, when we go into schools and teach, train teachers in inclusive education, and we did things for principals and policymakers, the most effective teaching tool we had was a panel we put together of 3 to 4 self-advocates talking about their experience of the education system. And nothing drove home that point, the point of the need for inclusive education more than listening to those 4 for an hour. So the more I see disabled people speaking up for themselves, I think the more hopeful I get. And the more we give them opportunities to do that, and the more they take opportunities to do that, it's, there is hope. But I think those big organizations are often part of the problem now. They want to talk about awareness because awareness is safe. When one thing you notice when disabled people are advocating, they talk about acceptance, and there's a big difference in what that means. People aren't unaware that autism or Down syndrome exists. So really, folks don't need their awareness; they need their acceptance. That's what's going to, lead to active change.
A few months ago, Neil wrote an article on Talent Culture about disclosing disability. How important do you think that is?
I mean, it's a tough thing. I've been in the situation where I've applied for jobs and I've disclosed, and I've been in situations where I've applied and haven't. You've got to read the context of the situation you're in. If you think that company is going to be open and accepting, then by all means, I think disclosing helps. I mean, as I said, I spent 15 years running from a disabled identity, and it made me miserable. And embracing that was a wonderful thing. But that said, you can embrace it and still not disclose it a job, for a job, because you might not get the interview. I mean, there's some people that you can't go past get to the interview without disclosing, obviously, visible disabilities. But until that point, I think it's got to be a personal decision. I can't tell anyone what they should feel comfortable with or what they shouldn't. I certainly felt, about 10 years ago that whenever I disclosed, I didn't get the interview. Now, I don't know if that was coincidence or not. Now I tend to always disclose because I'm comfortable with who I am, and if the company's not going to hire me because of that, it's probably not going to be a place I'm going to feel comfortable working. But again, not everyone's in the position to take that risk either, so.
Greg, I'm often asked when I'm speaking, as a matter of fact, I was speaking in Chicago the other day, and the question came up, and somebody said, and it was a group of service providers that I was training and trying to help them understand how using business language is going to help them partner with employers in a more effective way. And one of them said, well, should we be disclosing that we have a disability on our resume? And I said, well, think about what a resume is. A resume is a list of your qualifications, the keywords, what you're doing. We've moved away, many people have moved away from talking on your resume about personal stuff. Oh, I'm married and I have some kids, and blah, blah, and giving people a reason, especially in my beloved U.S., to discriminate against us. And so, generally, a resume, a resume is someplace where we talk about why we're qualified to do the jobs. Now, so they're like, when do we disclose? And I like your answer, because it sort of depends. I mean, if I'm deaf and I'm going to need interpretation during the interview, if I'm in a wheelchair and I want to make sure that accessible, there are times to disclose earlier than others. If I have dyslexia, which I don't, but if I have dyslexia, when is it relevant to bring this up? I mean, maybe it's not relevant at all during the interview. You hire me because I'm the best qualified candidate, and then maybe at some point, I need accommodations to be as productive as possible. So saying the same things, but just sort of saying them in a different way, in a way actually that employers hear. And I agree with what you just said. If I disclose to you that I have a disability and you're not going to employ me, well, obviously you are not the right employers for me anyway, and you are going to lose my brilliance, so shame on you. But I know a very senior woman in the United States that has a visible disability and an amazing background. 2 master's degrees, she's just amazingly talented. And she sent her resume around, and she sent it to one company in California that was very excited about this very talented woman, and they flew her to California, and she came into the interview in her motorized scooter, and it was really weird. The job had already been filled. And so it's like really, really, and so she wound up, she left, and I'm sure she was very discouraged, but she got a much better job with a multinational company. But so we know discrimination happens, but I think sometimes we got to be logical about it as well, which is what you're saying. So.
Well, I mean, when I go for a disability studies job in higher ed, I'll disclose because I think it actually, I'll disclose in the cover letter because I think it actually makes me a better candidate.
Right.
It shows I have experience. Now, there are some places that won't recognize that nuance, obviously, but, generally, they will. Other places, I haven't said a word until I was employed there because I don't hide who I am, but, it wasn't relevant. I didn't need any access requirements for an interview, and so why do it? And so, I think you judge the context, who you are, what your fears are, whether or not you're comfortable with it, because your comfort will also affect whether or not you get the job. And so, I think it ends up having to be an individual decision. And you do have to account for, when will I need to tell them, or when will I, do I need to tell them?
Right.
I'm pro-disclosure as far as possible if people are comfortable doing it, because I believe that then creates the atmosphere within which other people feel confident to disclose too. If everybody is hiding it, then I think you're going to perpetuate that feeling of anxiety and fear.
Politically, I agree.
Yeah.
But
I know pragmatically, you have to.
Individual.
Yeah, it has to be down to the individual. Has to be down to the individual, absolutely. But if we can, and if people feel comfortable, I encourage them to do so, because I think it then creates that next level of comfort for the next people, and it opens up and makes it easier and safer for people to disclose. It's a bit like, so I used the term coming out because I deliberately appropriated the language of the gay rights movement because we're a civil rights movement too. And you know what? There were the same kind of issues with people feeling in the closet, people being shamed, and society prejudiced against them. So I think there are quite a few parallels. We've reached the end of our half hour. It's been a great chat. I'm really looking forward to you joining us on Twitter. And I think it's going to be a great Twitter chat too. So thank you very much, Greg.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg.